Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and welcome back to the Catholic Culture Podcast. The topic of AI art has become increasingly prominent in discussions of the future of the arts in the past couple of years, and in particular in the visual arts. Some of this technology has gotten accessible enough to the general public that more and more people are playing around with it and discussing it, and even in religious circles this is the case, and there's a bit of a debate over whether AI art is a good thing at all, and particularly whether it's appropriate for religious works. And I've been kind of disappointed personally to see even some Catholics embracing this, at least in what they would consider to be kind of a limited way. But recently on Twitter, which is a cute little nickname I came up with for x.com, I saw this wonderful thread by someone named Susannah Black Roberts, who is somebody I've been following on Twitter for a while, and always appreciate her thoughts. And it was just a great critique of AI art and the Christian embrace of it. By some Christians, I should say. And so I just invited her on to talk with me about the subject. We're going to have kind of a freewheeling conversation about it. Really looking forward to diving into this issue. Susannah Black Roberts is a senior editor of Plough and has written for publications including First Things, Fair Forward, Front Porch Republic, Mere Orthodoxy, and The American Conservative. Susannah, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you are, I believe, sort of a high church Anglican or Anglo-Catholic, and I am, of course, Catholic, hence the Catholic Culture Podcast. So I know that depending on what kind of denomination I was speaking to, the theological perspective on this topic may or may not change. And first of all, I'm assuming that with you being a high church Anglican, we're probably going to have a pretty similar perspective on things like iconography, for instance. I would ask, do you agree with that? But also, what's your experience with, do you see different people from different Christian backgrounds responding to this question differently?
I think I do. I'm not sure, actually. I've seen, well, first of all, let me respond to the question first. Yeah, I'm sort of like Anglo-Catholic friendly. I'm not sure what I'm an Anglican in part because it's the closest that I can get to like Reformed Catholic for English speaking people. Like it's the most generic of possible denominations that I can get to. And I kind of feel like, well, if I'm not Catholic, if I'm not Roman Catholic, then I don't really have the confidence to like say, okay, Presbyterianism is definitely true, so I should be like that. Just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm kind of a mere Christian, I would say, but that includes, a lot of Anglo-Catholic stuff, and obviously the sort of decision of which council was it? The Seventh Council, on the iconoclast controversy.
Right. Yeah, I forget which one that was, but
yeah. So yeah, I think we probably are pretty much on the same page about that. Weirdly enough, I have not seen that much of a difference in between different denominations, or if you want to call it, like between Roman Catholics and Protestants and Eastern Orthodox. I've not seen that much of a difference. The difference that I've seen has to do with either a general, like if you are excited, if your like vibe is to be excited about tech stuff, and you're kind of into Silicon Valley culture and you read sci-fi, then you tend to be more open to this. If your vibe is Tolkien, you tend to be totally revolted by it. And then there's a lot of people who kind of don't have a particular vibe, but who, I've seen this among Catholics and Protestants, are just like not particularly thoughtful. And they tend to be more open to it. Just like, it's like, why would you not?
Right.
It's a new technology. Why would you not like, isn't that better? Like, it's easier. It's like, yeah. So it seems like it ought to be the case that either Protestants are less friendly to it or more friendly to it. I don't, but haven't actually seen a difference.
Yeah, that's interesting and troubling. And yes, I have seen Catholics using AI art to generate images of sacred personages, at least for online use, at least for fun, but also advocating its use in, say, church bulletins or, blog posts about the liturgical year and things like that. And it is striking to me that people who kind of throw around the adjective like incarnational a lot, would go for this. It is. I'll be honest. It is surprising to me because, but to me, I think it speaks to perhaps like a lack of human formation within the church before we even get to the theological questions about what's appropriate for use in sacred art, and that's a lot of what your thread was about, was that the human aspect of it. Because I think that if people had, I don't know, I just think if people like cared more about art, period, then they probably wouldn't be going for this. I just, it would never occur to me to think this is a good idea as somebody who, has a background as a musician and particularly a background as a jazz musician, somebody who performs live and improvises, as opposed to somebody who like sequences things into a computer, or like uses samples, which maybe is already like starting to approximate something that AI could do, But anyway, I do want to. This is going to be pretty much an anti-AI art discussion, but I do want to.
I don't think we're going to be that friendly to it.
Yeah, I do want to make at least a gesture towards like trying to, at least respond to some of the arguments that some Christians might make for this. So what are some of the arguments that you've encountered specifically from Christians in favor of the use of AI art, either in a religious context or just more generally?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest kind of difference actually is in terms of people who are thoughtful about it to some degree okay. So like if you are a serious artist, visual artist, you're probably going to be against this. If you're a serious writer or editor, you're going to be against the, verbal version of it, the writing version of it. You're going to have like the instinct of like, obviously this is wrong. If you're a serious computer programmer, like, which is a human techne, if not a human art, you're going to be in favor of it because it is part of your work. It's part of it. It's like an expansion of your, the art, the techne that you do. And so like that I think is the difference. I think that there are a lot of people out there who have absorbed the assumptions and values of tech people, for whom tech is their aspect of the creation mandate that they're living out without necessarily being tech people. And so they might not be like programming do like actually working with large language models in any kind of like actual sense, but they are happy to, ask Midjourney for like a picture of, I don't know, Saint Monica or something like that. And I think that's the difference. Like, the creation mandate is part of what I think is tripping us up here, because I do think that, I'm not a Luddite. I'm not I just had this great conversation with Paul Kingsnorth, who basically has two modes, one of which is all technology, including agriculture, is bad. And then his like more moderate mode is all technology after 2004 is bad. We were
Sure. I can get down with that.
Yeah. And I don't really think that either of those are true, although the second one is more likely to be true, I think. But so if some kind of computing technology is part of the creation mandate, which probably it is. I don't think like it's all sinful. I don't think computers are sinful. Then you can easily make the argument that like, okay, why should people, humans are doing their Adamic task. They're doing the task of making culture and building cities and building, which obviously has ambiguous signification in scripture, but is generally understood to be like, it's not actually a bad thing unless you're, doing the Tower of Babel. But, I do think that actually for a couple of pretty weird technical theological reasons, especially the use of language AIs is very Tower of Babel coded, and possibly the use of visual AIs as well. stuff like Midjourney. And I think that, yeah, well, I also have like very esoteric and extreme beliefs about the possibility of demons
Yes.
infesting the stuff, which we can talk about later.
Yes.
But yeah, that would be my steelman argument in favor of like all kinds of technology, including AIs.
Okay, so I'm making a note to later in this conversation talk about the head.
Yes.
From That Hideous
Yes,
Strength.
That Hideous Strength is nonfiction. We cannot address this question without that novel. There's no way. I don't understand how you could.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was thinking before we got on here, about the way that technology changes the way technology is not neutral. I think that's it's surprising to me that anybody can still think that it would be, and it's just a matter of how you use it. But I was thinking about the development of recorded music in the 20th century. There is an argument to be made that recorded music resulted in a decrease in musical culture overall because of the diminishment of a really strong amateur musical culture, which is extremely important as the seedbed of genius, among other things, and just for human life in general. Now, I'm not against recorded music, and part of the reason for that is that it didn't have to be that way. That's not the result that it had to have, but that's how human beings tend to be with technology, is that they embrace what is easy. And of course, also as a jazz musician, I am sympathetic to the idea that, okay, this is an art form built around improvisation, and how precious it is that we can hear the great improvisers of a century ago. You know what I mean? That's a really, really precious thing. Yeah. So I love that we have albums, and the development of certain musical forms have been informed by the existence of recorded music, of course. But anyway, I think we can probably make a distinction between things that human beings tend to overuse or over rely on, that reduce kind of the culture of artistic creation, just as being like sort of part of man's inheritance, whether you are a capital A artist or not, right? And technologies that are maybe sort of more inherently contrary to that, which I think we can make an argument for AI art being the latter. I don't know where I stand on. I haven't given a lot of thought to the use of AI in other areas. A friend of mine at my parish works with AI for curing cancer. And so I don't see why we would be against that. Art is my area, so I have opinions about that. And so what would be your argument for AI art being more of kind of like an intrinsic contradiction to artistic activity than things like recorded music, which might potentially have like secondary negative effects, but is not sort of inherently contrary to art?
Yeah, I think my argument would be something like, and I'm not sure about this. These are all like talking through possible, arguments. This is not like my final word. And I just want to preface by saying, like, I think the way to think about this in part, other than like the whole question of demons or a possible entire prohibition, is something like costs and benefits, but not in a utilitarian way, more in a virtue ethics way. So like, how does doing this shape us in either a good or bad way? How does engaging habitually with these technologies shape us in either a good or a bad way? And I think that there's something I have a stronger argument to make about this with ChatGPT or like word-based AI. But even with something like Midjourney, an image-based AI, I think that there is a contradiction in what it means to make. Like when the discipline of actual the making of art and imagination has to do with going inside yourself and like working with what you see, outside you and what you imagine inside you and the skills that you've developed to create something new, that is from you, that's actually from you, and you were with yourself as you made it. And you are now a different person because you made it. Like, to make something changes you.
Yeah.
At exactly like at walking pace, at like the pace that it takes for you to get to having finished it. If you type in a prompt, you kind of feel like you get a little bit of the feeling of having made something, having, painted a painting. But it's much, much weaker.
At best, it's like being a patron.
Yeah. You haven't like actually done the thing. You kind of might think that you have because you're confused. You haven't changed yourself, but you've basically put yourself in a position where you now no longer need to do the walking pace version of making, which means that you are never going to become anything different. Like, you're never going to change. You're never going to become the person who painted a painting because you think you already have become that person. And I find that quite frightening, actually, because it reminds me very much. I mean, the thing that it reminds me most of is, AI girlfriends and boyfriends or AI porn, where, like, if you're like a young person who's really lonely and really horny, that is going to scratch that itch. And that means that you are much, much less likely to actually live your life. And I think that, doing actual art, going on dates, getting married, having like sex within marriage, like, that's living your life. It's a lot slower and a lot more like gratifying. And a lot, it transforms you. It is the way that God, grows us up and makes us into full humans. And if you can do something that gives you the dopamine hit version, the totally subjective kind of like on a neurological level feeling that you've done that, it's a kind of castration of desire. And I think that making art by entering prompts in Midjourney is a castration of artistic desire. It's taking away the, whatever you want to call it, like the artistic thumos or the urge to make, because it's satisfying it in a fake and easy way.
Yeah. And again, I mentioned this before, but it does strike me that we've already kind of set ourselves up for being deceived in this way by, accepting that, like, putting a bunch of samples together is the same as composing.
Yeah.
Or playing video games. As you mentioned in your thread that you had read Patrick O'Brien's Master and Commander books, which I just started reading the past year, read the first 3, wonderful. And that inspired you to become a deckhand?
Yeah.
On a real ship, on like a tourist ship.
It's called Clipper City. You should go down. It's still sailing. It's sailing out of Pier 17.
Okay. And you had a friend who had played a video game where you're like a captain of a seaboat, and he thought that he had...
Yeah. He was making... It was actually someone I met through the G.K. Chesterton Society. And that was one of my first like clues where I'm like, maybe you can be like a trad cath and still be completely clueless about this, like about real life. Because he was actually trying to make the case that, like, yeah, he played this video game, and so basically we had the same experience. And it genuinely frightened me. It terrified me.
Were you upset? Were you angry with him?
I wasn't so much angry with him as just like totally dismayed at
flabbergasted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So you were responding in this particular Twitter thread that I saw to somebody who was suggesting that we don't have visual depictions of a lot of these great Old Testament figures, and that this, of course, eventually Christians should, rediscover greatness in the visual arts, but that this using AI to create depictions of certain Old Testament figures is kind of like a stopgap until then.
Mhm.
And you made the case, which you just mentioned, the analogy to pornography, that this is not something that like will tide us over till we get there. This is something that trains us to prefer something fake to the real thing. And
Yeah.
and you used the phrase that it scratches the itch. And so but the itch is for the purpose of the actual reality.
Yeah.
The itch is not supposed to be scratched for its own sake. And
Yeah.
so we are missing, you said it was short circuiting the actual real human drive involved here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know, people might argue that I'm just removing the manual labor almost from art. So I don't have the physical technique to do this, but I have the ideas, and the idea is where the art is. And it's like, I guess if you have no experience making art, then you can think that that I'm just going to be the idea guy, and I can put a sufficiently detailed prompt into this so that it really is, you know, my idea and it's artistic work. But that's just,
it makes it clear that you have never done art.
Yeah. Because there is something that you learn in the process. Like, yes, a sufficiently great and experienced artist can have that experience of like seeing the entire thing in his mind all at once and then executing it. But most of the time, certainly in music, which is an art that proceeds in time, right? What you're doing is moment by moment, you're getting more of the thing. And it's in the process of doing it that you do more of it. And that's certainly something that happens in the imagination. You receive more of it over time. And the materials themselves can like lead you in a certain direction. You're interacting with something real. But still it's something that it leaves room for inspiration, you know, for even divine inspiration, in the process of making something. And the thing is that you can put in a prompt, but a human artist can put love and devotion and even like spiritual intention into every detail, let's say in the visual art that he's making. And in the case of religious iconography, there's this tradition of the very making of the icon, especially in the East, is a prayer. In order to make a proper devotional work, especially anything that's going to be used in a liturgical context, you need to do this with knowledge of the holy person being depicted, and you need to be able to do it with intention and love. But AI doesn't actually know anything. It has no knowledge. It has information, it has data. That's not the same thing as knowledge. I don't know how much I can like sort of explain that here, but it's not the same as knowledge, and it certainly is incapable of love. It's incapable of real spiritual devotion. And so the personal devotion in the actual execution is not the same as kind of like a pious intention in sort of putting in a generalized prompt that a machine then executes the details of, and therefore it doesn't come through in the final result. And it's not like commensurate with the actual needs of an artwork, let alone religious artwork, you know, let alone religious artwork that's not merely illustrative, but is supposed to serve an actual like purpose in prayer. You're not able to kind of encounter the person on the other side of the artwork because, first of all, there's not a person executing it. And also, the AI doesn't know the person who's being depicted. We can actually have personal knowledge, a personal relationship with the saints, you know, and that cannot be conveyed through the medium of AI because AI is not so much a medium as it is a completely different kind of reality.
Well, it's not, because that implies an ontological heft, and there's no ontological heft there, unless there is, in which case we got to stay away from it, which we can talk about later. But like, it's not a different reality; it's a lack of reality. It's like it is.
Yes.
You can see, you can really see sin as privation in AI, because it's a falling away from reality. It's not an alternative reality. And I think that, I mean, one way to just sort of like talk about, especially sort of like Protestants could like wrap their heads around what you're talking about, with the purpose of, for example, what the Easterns call writing an icon, is if you look at the way that the instructions for building the temple or the tabernacle, say, worked, like aesthetic creation, like doing all of these like jillion different craftsman like craftsman traditions that are listed in the instructions for building the tabernacle, like those are meant to serve God. Those are like what worship is meant to organize our cultural lives, like absolutely. And the tabernacle and then later the temple are incredibly powerful illustrations of that. Like God is like, here are the different, the 80 different, sort of separate crafts and arts that you are going to have to get really good at in order to make and then, bring to life this place of worship that I want. And, an AI can't worship, an AI can't pray. And what the purpose of our lives, of all of our lives, is worship. And certainly the purpose of our aesthetic lives, and certainly the purpose of our aesthetic lives when we are specifically doing Christian art, is worship of God. And we can't outsource that. He will not accept worship that we outsource.
Yeah, no, that's all great. There's so many different directions to go into. But we could also talk about just like, what is this? I'm thinking about the visual arts a lot here. When you look at this stuff, it also, I keep coming back to the fact that we've been preparing ourselves for this because we've already become accustomed to work that is so glossy and has its humanity stripped away. So in music, the use of auto-tune, for instance, on somebody's voice, or the computerized regularity of rhythm in modern electronic pop music, where human rhythm breathes. It's not perfectly regular, all of these different things, or even like in cinematography, there's this trend towards this very glossy kind of commercialized look in all, a lot of movies that are made now. So when you look at this AI art, there's something kind of glossy and soulless about it. And it, that's partially because it, doesn't have a soul, but it's also partially because I think of what people are looking for when they use this technology. I don't know how it's all trained and stuff, but, people have commented when an AI image of the Virgin Mary comes up, there's always this kind of like glossy sensuality to it, almost like it's been trained on porn, anime, whatever, and that it is, there's ethical issues that people bring up of like stealing people's work and incorporating it into AI work, but also the issue of like, where is this stuff being sourced from? How do you know that pornographic images are not being used to source the faces of religious art?
I mean, they definitely are. That's how it works.
But my understanding is that that's entirely possible, or at least images that are just inappropriate in some other way for the ethos of what is being conveyed. And nobody seems to, that doesn't seem to make anybody lose any sleep when they're making an AI image of Mary or St. Monica, as you mentioned. That like, where is this all coming from? Again, it's being just kind of mixed together from a bunch of different parts, and people seem to think that mixing and matching sources and then making an image that is the sum of its parts is artistic creation, but it's not. I think we have to recover an awareness of a real sense of that there is such a thing as inspiration, that we're not just doing the bare minimum of imagination, which is, I'll imagine a green sun or something like that. That is part of the faculty of imagination, but that's not all there is to it. There is genuinely a new thing being produced.
Yes. However, I think another important aspect of this, and David Shaingold, who's a wonderful you should know him. He lives like right around the corner from me, he and Audrey. But he wrote a wonderful piece for Plough that I will send to you so you can put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Basically explaining that actually not only can computers not, not only can AI not write an essay or make an argument or make art, computers don't even do math. They don't do what we do when we do math because they don't understand. And so, like if you sort of look at a kind of Thomistic psychology of the different faculties that we have, imagination is one, understanding is another. Computers definitely don't understand either. Like they're not doing even the bare minimum. They're not doing what we think that they can do. When we do math, what we're doing is having a kind of insight into the mind of God, into the Platonic realm. And, we have we understand when you get when you are able to do a proof, or when you understand basically the argument of why a right answer is right, when you're not just doing the kind of grammar school kind of math where you're just doing formulas and plugging it in, but you're actually doing the kind of math that most of us learned for the first time in geometry, where you kind of understand why it is the case that the right answer is right, and you feel it inside yourself. You feel it's not like you're doing something that a computer can't do. And I think one of the most we're most alienated from most of us are alienated from the part of us that can do math, for example. That is one of the things that very few people spent much time after 10th grade doing math proofs. And some people never had that experience, and some people's whole experience of math was being doing algorithms, essentially, which is basically being a computer. And so if that's all that you know of math, then yeah, you can think that a computer could do math. But if you are a mathematician, or if you're someone who's even enjoyed doing math beyond that time, or if you remember what it was like to do that, you realize that, okay, not only can this is literally not something that computers can do. They don't have that thing in them that shows them why the Pythagorean theorem is correct. All they have is the line of code that generates the correct answer. And so I want to push back on the idea that okay, we have inspiration, which is more than imagination. And so computers definitely don't even have imagination.
Right. No, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think we kind of, when we have an impoverished view of what artistic creation is, then we do set ourselves up for impoverishing it even further in the case of AI. I mean, you mentioned in your thread, so far from being a stopgap until a sort of some future Christian revival of art, the embrace of AI art will guarantee that we never get such a revival. You said in the future, children won't believe that David, a man, painted the death of Socrates, because in the future, the only way to get such a painting is to get AI to generate it in the style of David. And I think that's true. And I think the proof of that is that that's exactly how we got to the point of people thinking AI art is a good idea in the first place. Is people already agreed, again, going back to the example of music, people already agreed that, putting together a bunch of samples and sequencing something on a computer is just as good as composing note for note. And so we already know, that where this pattern of thinking leads. So there's really no reason to be optimistic when that has set us up for believing that AI can be just as good as real art, or even an adequate substitute for it temporarily. There's no reason to be more optimistic about AI when we see, lesser versions of the same thing impoverishing our idea of what art can be.
Yeah. I think the only way to short-circuiting is to just give ourselves and our children the experience of doing these things. Because
Yes.
if you don't do these things, then you won't have any idea what someone's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the experience of writing an essay, and doing the process of like teaching yourself and discovery and like weird alchemy that happens when you write an essay that has to do with us being made in the image of God, who's the logos. Like it's a deeply weirdly rational and yet mystical experience to write an essay. And if no kid has the experience of ever having done that, and they think that writing an essay is just generating a prompt, then they won't, like, there's no way to describe from the outside what the experience of doing the real thing is. This is like the Thomas Nagel thing, what's it like to be a bat? Like, we won't know what it's like to be human unless we do the human things.
So what would be I've been talking a lot about visual arts and music, but so you're obviously a writer and an editor, and as am I, but I haven't given it as much thought with regard to writing. So what are some of the more specific issues to writing that you would bring up when it comes to AI? That we haven't already kind of touched on in a general way.
Jesus is the logos, he's the word. And Christianity is obviously a religion of the whole body. It's a religion of the visual arts, but it is also profoundly a religion of the word. And God uses, we don't have, immediate angelic intelligence. God uses this weird, changing over time, discursive mode of explaining things to us using words. And it is like the primary human sort of faculty. Like, animals don't do this. Words is what we do. And to outsource our participation in the logos to an AI seems to me to be, I mean, maybe this is just because I am a writer and editor, but it seems to me to be possibly even more sinister than visual arts. Because and the thing is, like, at some point, I feel like, all right, I can go on and give more reasons, and I can use very powerful language. But, and maybe that's appropriate because I'm trying to make an argument about why argument is important and why discursive, word-based argument is important. And so I will go on trying to use language to talk about this. But on some level, if you're not struck with absolute horror at the prospect of not learning to be people of the word, like children not growing up and going through the Noam Chomsky stages of like language acquisition in the fullest sense, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if you need a spiritual awakening, like,
a way, it's kind of like I haven't heard anybody say this for a while, but in sort of like maybe the early stages of kind of the new right, I remember a phrase being like, we're not going to discuss this anymore. Like, there's been enough discussion. Whether the arguments work or not, we just have to do everything in our power to stop this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that, again, like, there's the stopping and there's the starting. And I think that, like,
yes,
ideally I would like to ban it. I mean, I just would. I'd like to ban it for the same reason I'd like to ban the pill, because I don't think humans are capable of using these, like the existence of the technology as a possibility is already screwing up our choice context. And we are way too stupid, and way too just like, we're not stupid. We're people of second nature, and the culture that we grow up in is our second nature. And what our culture gives us and says is okay or possible or, an option, we will think is okay and possible and an option. And so that's what happens with the pill. And that's why you've got like a ton of like evangelical women who are pro-life taking the pill, which is abortifacient, because they don't know it. And a ton of evangelical women doing IVF. And
you just made a DC Schindler-esque argument against liberalism right there, I think.
Yeah, of course.
When you said that merely things being an option, it affects the way we think.
Yeah, and like, this is how it's not a problem. Like, obviously, this is also not an absolute, like, we are not absolutely conditioned by our culture, and we
Right.
are, I'm enough of a kind of
You're a
post.
convert.
Yeah, and I'm a convert, and so I was not conditioned by my culture, and I'm also enough of a post liberal to be like, okay, there is probably a larger realm of appropriate human debate and freedom than I thought there was maybe like 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still enough of a post liberal and a Schindler person to be like, okay, it's totally correct and normal and good that we should be shaped by what our culture says is good. And that's why
Yeah.
it's really important to have a good culture
Yeah.
and a good set of laws.
Yeah.
We can't always be like self-creating and rebelling our way into truth. I did, and God, made me a weird enough person that was kind of a satisfying experience. But for the most part, it's kind of better to like have the world that you grow up in point you towards, this is what Dorothy Day talked about. It's a world where it's easier to be good.
Yep.
And, in this, and people like hear all those post-liberal arguments and they're like, oh no, this is like shutting down human possibility and like repressing people. And I'm like, no, like what's shutting down human possibility and repressing people is living in a technological regime that like doesn't even allow you to learn about the many, many virtues, the many powers that are in you as a human being. Like, it doesn't allow you to learn that you are a musician. It doesn't allow you to learn that you're a visual artist. It doesn't allow you to learn that that you are a person of the word, that you can like use words to communicate, that you can discover what you think through writing. Like, that's not, I'm not like trying to take away freedom from people. I'm trying to like shatter a prison. That's what's going on here. Like, we are entering into a kind of like mirror prison, like a sort of a digital prison. I've talked about AI as a kind of anti-Renaissance, where if the Renaissance was all about kind of a rediscovery, we can like talk about, Patrick Deneen would probably quibble about this. Like, is this actually what happened? Is this like what the kind of romantic standard Whig history vision of the Renaissance was like? This is a rediscovery of what humans can do, of human excellences, of human powers, of human virtues. And AI is literally the opposite of that. It's a forgetting of what humans can do, of human excellences and human powers and human virtues. And it is a rendering of human abilities and possibilities down to it's minimizing them and devaluing them. And I think, the thing that I kind of want to start, I keep talking about this, is something called the Stay Human movement, which would be kind of like a renewed Christian humanist, arts and crafts, kind of William Morris inspired movement to reteach and recommit to actually doing the human stuff. Like, nothing more than that necessarily. Just like write essays starting from a blank page rather than from a prompt. Like, draw starting with a pencil and a piece of paper. Like, make a meal rather than, whatever, heating something up or ordering something in. Just like do the human things.
Right. Going back to tech people, it seems like sometimes there actually seems to be a kind of resentment against artists when people are arguing for, AI art being just as good. It seems like there's almost like an envious resentment in some of the comments that I see. I don't know if you...
Yeah, I think part of it is just like we have a very American culture, and cultures influenced by American culture really hate anything that smacks of elitism or anti-populism or like high cult, like there being such a thing as high culture.
Yes.
Which, I mean, that's part of it, but it also doesn't really totally that can't be all of it, because like, I mean, part of the problem,
it's not about high versus low art.
Yeah, it's not about high versus like part of the problem is that we've lost folk culture. Like,
yes,
we've lost like folk music making in the
Yes.
proper sense. Like when we talk about folk music, we're talking about like Bob Dylan, who is a folk musician, sort of, or Joni Mitchell, but the point of folk music is that it's music that you kind of make.
Right.
And we've lost a lot of the kind of DIY culture. Like, if you read Little Women, they're putting on plays in their,
Yep.
and like obviously like a lot of us still do that, but it's kind of harder and it's less normal because there's a lot of other stuff that's a lot easier.
Yep.
And it's easier to like, and I love movies. I love,
Yeah, me too.
good TV. And I think that they're a genuine art form.
Yep.
So I'm not saying that like it's bad to watch movies or TV. I'm saying that like, you like you don't want to give up
Yeah.
parts of like the human experience. I really
Right.
think it's a bad idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know what the reason is, whether it's just anti-elitism or
I
whether,
think you're right. I think that's more of it, anti-elitism, um, than maybe a specific resentment against artists. I think it's the
yeah,
idea that not everybody can do everything the same, and that
yeah,
but it's also, yeah, like you said, that the folk art thing is very important because it's not about saying Mozart is better than drill music or whatever. It's saying that even like a cruddy kid's drawing is better than AI art.
yeah,
That's the point.
yeah,
That's really important to say too.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. And I mean that part of the main problem here is ultimately a consumer culture where like what we think the purpose of a thing is to be bought, like to be seen, perceived, desired, and then purchased.
mhm.
And like we don't know what to do with it afterwards. We don't know what to, like, once you own the whatever it was that like made you buy it, you're just like, oh, let me go back on Amazon. Um, like we don't have any relationship to things other than the final product in the moment of buying it. And so the idea that like there might be a value to something that's that is not what you can see in the moment of being about to buy it,
Yeah.
is very alien to us. And so if something looks like it took, I don't know, 120 hours in the studio, then that's just as good as if it did.
Right.
But the problem with all this is that, like, actually, the way that material reality was set up is that if for something to look like it took 120 hours in the studio, you had to spend 120 hours in the studio. And so I think there is probably something that's intrinsically wrong about short circuiting that. But then you get to well, is it wrong to make, jacquard fabric using the looms, the looms that were invented in France
Yeah.
in the 1780s that Charles Babbage then tried to or used as inspirations for his computer? Like, I don't think so. I don't think I don't
Right.
think mechanical looms are bad.
Hmm.
But I
It's
think
not about technology being bad. It's about the specifics of, you judge it on a case by case basis. What I mean is not by each product necessarily, but by each technology. Like, what is this? How does this interface with the, to what extent does this become a true extension of the virtue of art
and I
that's
do
being
think that like
practiced?
one of the things that we can use to like, okay, let's be our DIY, whatever, like Amish decision council of decision is like, okay, does this technology actually expand human abilities in some significant and real way? So, for example, I think a great use of AI is the decoding of the Pompeii scrolls or the
Yes.
Herculaneum
Yes.
scrolls, because
Yes.
that's not something that humans could even hypothetically do without
Right.
technology.
Yeah.
It's actually extending our agency.
Yep.
The kind of cancer research, the kind of like protein folding research that people are using, there's a lot of really good uses, a
Yes.
lot of really good uses for large language models, for the kind of pattern recognition that those things are based on. My friend Arlie Coles she's an Episcopal laywoman. She's very devout and very kind of thoughtful about this stuff. She actually works in large language model engineering. I don't know what she does, but she's like profoundly against all of the things that we've been talking about. And she's
Right.
like, it's just a misapplication of the technology.
Yeah.
Like when you use the technology to do what are human specialties, you're misusing it. You should be using it for what it's for, you
Right.
know? And so I guess like one way to think about it is like, if you're using a technology to do a thing that is one of the human kind of core competencies, don't do that. Like, don't use a technology to, chat to your friend. Like, I'm not talking about the phone, or like obviously DMing is kind of like an extension of like just writing letters. This is fine.
Right.
But, don't like set up an AI chatbot to be a friend to your friend, because that's not, you're cutting your whatever. Like I can't, again, it's at this point, it's just like, all right, if you don't see that, then that's your problem.
Yeah. You mentioned you referred to burying one's talents in
Yeah.
the thread.
Yeah.
And I think one of the big problems with art today is that it requires vulnerability,
Mhm.
and people are less and less willing to. It requires far more vulnerability to write a melody than it does to come up with a beat.
Mhm.
I just know that from experience,
Mhm.
and I'm not even talking about generating a beat with a computer. I'm just talking about melody just requires more
Mhm.
vulnerability, in general, as a component of music. And, there's a vulnerability in the receiving inspiration, in the expression of it. There's also just the vulnerability of being willing to fail, and in, being humbled by having to grow in a craft gradually. And, in the parable of the talents, what does the guy say? He's afraid of failure. The guy who
Mhm.
buried his
Mhm.
talent. He's afraid of failure. He's afraid of being judged
Yeah.
harshly
Yeah.
for not succeeding, and that's why he buries his talents. And
Yeah.
so that does seem to be a lot of what's happening with this AI art. It's just easier. It's just safer to do this. There's no vulnerability whatsoever
Mhm.
in putting a prompt into AI.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's partly that. I also think that might be slightly, and I do think that like a huge chunk of like how to read the parable of the talents is that fear of failure. Like, I'm not even going to try. And partly, you can read all of the different versions of self-sabotage that we do are, you can see in in the guy who buries his talents, because he's like worried that he's going to get in trouble, or it's not going to work, or he won't be as good as the other guys. um and so all of the self-sabotage, all of the fear of vulnerability, all of the fear of failure, yes, it's in there. But I also think that a huge aspect of why people like are more willing to do AI art is because we have way shorter attention spans. I think just like
Yeah.
we just don't have the patience. We don't have we have trained ourselves. Obviously, virtue ethics works, which is terrifying because we have changed ourselves. I'm sure I've changed myself over the last probably 10 years, such that well, I mean, this isn't really true because I really do still read a lot of novels. But, there were definitely times when I had kind of fallen out of the novel reading habit,
Mm-hmm.
and like I could just feel myself, or if I try to read a novel on my phone versus like in like an actual print book, like I can't read a novel on my phone because I'm always switching over to Twitter. Like our main problem is that we have trained ourselves, we've changed our natures, and got not changed our natures because we can't do that, but we have tweaked our second natures such that we now have the attention span of a mayfly. And it's really hard to do anything when you have the attention span of a mayfly.
Yeah. Yeah. So we were talking about AI in a religious context earlier, and I would say that it's even arguably sacrilegious to use AI to produce images of for the purpose of religious devotion, because it's so utterly inappropriate in a number of ways that we discussed. I think that maybe could lead us to demons. So
Okay.
let's let's talk about. I read this interesting article. I can't remember who wrote it. He was comparing to St. Augustine's discussion of theurgy in the City of God, where he talks about these Neoplatonists like communicating with spirits in various ways. And anyway, he brought up certain phenomena in like text-based AI where they give really weird responses to certain kind of questions. There's like weird glitches that are kind of creepy. And
there's the thing. There's who I you know what, even cut out those words because I don't even want to have said those words. But like there are a couple of different examples of, unless like this is so obviously like demons that come on, like
we'll give a general explanation of what you're talking
okay.
about.
So there have been various textual and visual quote unquote glitches in various kinds of people's experience using various kinds of AI. From starting about 3 years ago till now, where the kind of the text that is generated, and I'm not going to be specific. The first one that I saw or that I noticed was actually a visual one, and like there was an image of a woman that was very distinctive that cropped up in various kinds of prompts. It was as though this person were kind of haunting the Mid-Journey or whatever it was, the AI image generator. It was like a very disturbing image. Some of you might have seen it. Don't go looking for it.
I haven't seen it.
Okay, don't. There was also another. There were a couple of other kind of word-based, again, glitches where you're just like.
But reproducible glitches.
Reproducible glitches that are like, okay, there's a being there, that is a being of hate and darkness and insanity, that is kind of living somehow in the niches of this generator or something. We don't know how it works.
Okay, so there's every reason to believe that this is theoretically possible.
Oh okay, yeah,
demons can manipulate the physical world. They can even manipulate produce things in our imaginations because there's a physical component to that. But the reason that AI may be inviting this is because it can become a form of divination, and especially any time that you start to enjoy the idea that this might be an intelligence. Like there's people who really want AI to become actually intelligent. And of course we know that's never going to happen, but there's every reason to believe that demons could send someone a message through AI to make them believe that.
And I mean, like, again, we got to go back to That Hideous Strength, where like the people at the NICE, and I'm not going to give a backstory. Just go read the novel. It's called That Hideous Strength. It's by C.S. Lewis. It's the third of the space trilogy. Read the other two first, etc. Assuming you've just done that.
Yeah.
The guys at the NICE are materialists. They're totally, except for the one sort of priest, Anglican priest, who's very flaky. They're all materialists. They don't believe that they're summoning demons, but they are. Like, it doesn't really matter what they believe because, demons are fine if you don't believe in them.
So they've got this reanimated head.
Yeah.
And what do they think it is?
They think it's a reanimated head.
Yeah.
They think that when they talk to the reanimated head, they're talking to Alcazan, who's the murderer whose head they reanimated. They think that they just were very, very good at doing the technical medical stuff of reanimation.
Yeah.
And, somehow his being reanimated gives him particular wisdom or particular ability to guide this movement that they're creating.
Yeah.
But but in fact, it's just a demon. They didn't reanimate the guy. The guy is, when you die, you are no longer going to be hanging around to reanimate your head.
Yeah.
And so it turns out to be demons. And then they start to understand this, but they still can't like wrap their heads around calling them demons because that's like part of the worldview of their enemies. So they call them macrobes, um,
Hmm.
on analogy with microbes.
Okay.
And, you know, it's just like, and some of them know about the macrobes, some of them don't. It's like when materialists interact with demons, they definitely like they don't have to believe, you don't have to believe the stuff is true for it to be true. Like
Yeah. Right.
it just is true. And we have like whatever 5,000 years and more worth of this problem happening where people make idols, and then like when the Hebrew Isaiah talks about this, like, oh, you chop down like a cypress tree and then you like made part of it into kindling, and you warmed your food over it, and then you made another part of it into a god, and you like, are you stupid? Do you not remember when you like made that thing that you are now worshiping and asking for help into a god? It's just a
Yeah.
piece of wood that you made. And so on one level, obviously that's true. And like 50% of the
Yes.
witness of scripture about idols is, do you not remember that you just made that like 5 minutes
They
ago?
have no power to
They
speak, et
have
cetera,
no
et
power,
cetera.
like
Yeah.
you, whatever. And then 50% of the scriptural witness about idols is, oh, but actually there are these things called demons, which kind of get in like the back of the idol and then like
Yeah.
screw you
Right.
up through it. Um,
Right.
and so, this happens all the time. And it doesn't, you know, what I think is like the least likely to be the case is the idea that somehow AIs are like emergent beings
Hmm.
that are actually intelligent and self-conscious, and, you know, come out of either human intelligence, or, out of machine intelligence. Like I think that is actually the least likely
Yes.
option.
And that's the least interesting use of AI in sci-fi stories to me because I can't buy into the idea. If it's premised on the idea that this is really intelligent, then I just don't find it interesting. But what I find interesting and scary is what are the implications of AI for how human beings will behave, say in Blade Runner or whatever it might
Yeah.
be. Um, and then yes, the spiritual component of it, which I don't see in sci-fi a lot, except for then that one instance, which is analogous
Yeah.
in that hideous strength.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So, I mean, there are a lot of people, including Paul Kingsnorth, who have talked about I did this one podcast with him where like he walked me through kind of the way that he looks at all of this. And he's a wonderful guy. He's a very dark vision of where we are,
Hmm.
but he's also like a recent, very intensely converted person. And he had a really dark vision of where we were before in various ways. Like he was kind of in despair about environmental stuff, and then he was being a druid. Um, and so his current dark vision is like, okay, we're doing a lot of Tower of Babel stuff here.
Right.
Um, and you look into these phones like they're scrying mirrors. You turn over your phone, and on the back of it, there's an apple with a bite taken out of it. Like, there's something off here. Um, he's actually a very hopeful and happy person. I once asked him, like, was it hard for you to like kick the despair habit after you converted? And he was like, no, because I got more information. Basically, like he was so
Right.
completely converted. Like he basically had already had a supernatural worldview, but he was being a druid, and he's like, oh, I was wrong about who the good guys were. So that's one thing. B, he was right. He already had a kind of despairing vision of what we're doing to the environment, and he still does, except that it's not despairing because he's just like, oh, we're not all powerful. Like God is sovereign and he loves the natural world. And, obviously we are screwing up massively, and we're, messing up the Adamic task of caring for creation. Um, and God is aware that we have messed that up and, has solved the problem by coming and dying for us.
Hmm.
And, um, And he's like, so, well, I'm not in despair because I have different information than I had before, which is wonderful. So that's a wonderful approach. So don't get freaked out by this stuff. Like, God is definitely still sovereign. That's not a Calvinist thing to say. That's just a, Christian thing to say.
Yes.
But also don't mess with it. I think that they're like, whatever, I'm pretty, yeah, there's a lot of things to, that you will be better off with on any number of levels for not messing with.
Yeah. Great. Well, will you send me anything written on this that you think might be additional good material for the listeners to read that I can put in the show notes?
Yeah, and I'll send you the link to the Paul Kingsnorth podcast where we talked about this.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Susannah, for this. It was a great conversation.
My pleasure. This was awesome.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that like I can convince listeners to do, it's just read the Space Trilogy. It's like the newspaper, or not the newspaper. It's like Twitter, except
it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's not fiction.
Yeah. So, where can people look for you? I'll link to your Twitter, but is there anything else that you'd like people to know about?
I'm an editor at Plough, which is a magazine published by the Bruderhof, which is an Anabaptist group. I'm not an Anabaptist, but they let me work for them anyway. They
publish things of interest to non.
They do. Yeah, it's a magazine of mere Christianity. It's not. Yeah. It's very, and we publish like non-Christians as well. I've described it as a crunchy Anabaptist First Things, which is fairly inaccurate, but also kind of accurate. So go to plough.com for them. And my husband and I have a Substack called The Anchored Argosy. So that's substack.argosy.com, I think is how that works. But wouldn't
it be argosy.substack.com?
Yeah, thank you. That.
Yeah. Okay.
So go there and you'll get all kinds of pictures of like food.
Okay.
Like cookies and like architecture and various places that we go and like our family and my mom's dog and stuff.
Okay, great.
And also like links to all of our stuff that we do. My husband's a biblical theologian, and got it. And we both write and podcast a lot. Anyway,
groovy. All right. Well, thank you so much, Susannah. This was a blast.
Likewise.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. I will see you next time.
The Catholic Culture Podcast is a production of CatholicCulture.org. Check out our other podcasts, including Way of the Fathers, an early church history podcast hosted by Jim Papandrea, Catholic Culture audiobooks bringing to life classic Catholic writings, and Criteria, the Catholic Film Podcast, featuring deep analysis of great films from a Catholic perspective. You'll find all of this, as well as Catholic news, commentary, liturgical year resources, and much more at CatholicCulture.org.